Tidbits from TNT, Saturday the 5th of October 2024. Listen to the full version on the official dinarreport.com website and become our supporter on Patreon. TNT. Tishwash. Iraqi Prime Minister receives first Swiss ambassador after 33 years. Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani received today, Saturday, the Swiss ambassador to Iraq, Daniel Hun, who is the first ambassador of his country after the reopening of the Swiss embassy in Baghdad. The Prime Minister welcomed the reopening of the Swiss embassy after about 33 years of closure, and considered it an important step and a new stage in relations between the two countries. He stressed the importance of activating joint working committees, which would contribute to more fruitful bilateral cooperation, according to a statement issued by his office and received by Shafaq news agency. The meeting witnessed an emphasis on the mutual desire to strengthen Iraqi-European relations, especially in light of the stable security situation in Iraq. The development renaissance that included all vital economic sectors, the government's support for the work and investment environment, and the creation of constructive economic partnerships. For his part, Ambassador Hun stressed that reopening his country's embassy in Baghdad would contribute to strengthening mutual relations and help Swiss companies to operate in Iraq and benefit from available investment opportunities. The meeting touched on the ongoing Zionist aggression on Gaza and Lebanon, its targeting of defenseless civilians, the role of the European Union in stopping this massacre, and the position of the international community required to limit the expansion of the conflict in the region, and the dangers and threats it poses to regional and international security. Tishwash. Government advisor. Development Fund provides great support to private sector. Advisor to the Prime Minister, Hussein Flamers, confirmed today, Saturday, that the Development Fund provided the private sector with unprecedented great support, while setting two conditions for developing the private sector. Flamers said in a statement to the Iraqi news agency, INA, Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani blessed the first national forum for the private sector, which is held by the Private Sector Development Department at the Ministry of Trade, in cooperation with Beit al-Hikmah for training and consulting, indicating that such meetings put us in the forefront and we are on the right path in developing the private sector. Flamers explained that, we must benefit from the versions that preceded us in other countries and develop the private sector, and work to have a single window that enables those working in the private sector to be a source of glory for it, and for the process to run smoothly, noting that, the government program presented by Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani supports the private sector. He explained that, the Iraqi Development Fund provided the private sector with unprecedented support, but we need legislation and intensifying laws. And legislation is a very important step in developing the private sector, noting that financial and banking services, facilitating and simplifying procedures, and providing services are all part of supporting the private sector, which depends on achieving two conditions. The first is simplifying procedures, and the second is reducing the efforts expended. Tishwash. Iraqi forces decide to keep out of Israel's battles with Hezbollah and Iran. Officials and paramilitary commanders say Israeli attacks could be ruinous for Iraq and even topple its government. The Iraqi political and armed forces affiliated to Tehran have decided to distance themselves from Israel's battles with Hezbollah and Iran, fearing that expanding the growing Middle Eastern wars could ruin Iraq and their own positions. Iraqi officials and leaders of Iranian-backed armed factions told Middle East Eye that the focus instead will be on providing humanitarian aid and financial support to civilians affected by Israel's war on Lebanon. No U.S. interests or military bases in Iraq or Syria will be targeted by Iraqi armed factions until further notice, commanders said. Over the past year, Israel's onslaught on Gaza has drawn reprisals from Hezbollah in Lebanon, Yemen's Ansar Allah, commonly known as the Houthi movement, and Iraqi paramilitary groups. Meanwhile, Israel has begun waging war on Lebanon. It has also killed Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, and assassinated Ismail Haniyeh, Hamas political leader, in Tehran. In response, Iran rained ballistic missiles on Israel on Tuesday, causing significant damage to Israeli military bases. The escalation has raised the prospect of further Iraqi participation, whether through Iraq's regular military or its multitude of paramilitary groups. However, Iraqi officials say there is a belief that this would lead to the collapse of Iraq's political, economic and military system and the fall of its government. Sudani seeks calm. Over recent days, Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani has held dozens of meetings with political leaders, commanders of armed factions allied with Iran and the top brass of Iraq's security services. According to one of Sudani's advisors, the Prime Minister sought to explain the reality of the situation facing Iraq and the consequences of any Iraqi party getting involved in the ongoing conflict. He also met with various Arab and Western diplomats, and spoke to several neighboring leaders, including the Egyptian President, Qatar's Emir and the King of Jordan. Sudani pressed them to help stop the ongoing Zionist aggression on Lebanon and Gaza, which threatens to expand the conflict throughout the region, his advisor said. Iraqi officials and commanders of armed factions told me they believe Iraq will be one of 4 countries that Israel will strike soon, in response to the Iranian missile attack. Sudani has been striving to deprive the Israelis of any pretext that could be used to strike Iraq. Advisor to the Prime Minister. A succession of dramatic and ruthless Israeli attacks on Lebanon and Hezbollah over the past 2 weeks have been met joyously by Israel's leadership and public. Yet, Sudani's advisor noted, the Iranian missiles have dispelled their euphoria. This means that it will definitely respond to this attack. Israel will inevitably attack Iraq, as it will attack Syria and Yemen, in addition to some oil facilities in Iran, he said. Sudani has been striving to deprive the Israelis of any pretext that could be used to strike Iraq, the advisor added. Sudani has been striving to deprive the Israelis of any pretext that could be used to strike Iraq, the advisor added. Iraq's political, security and economic situation is fragile and will not endure any party's adventure. Any ill-considered action in the coming days will have a high price and could burn everything. Potential targets. Sources in the armed factions and security services predict Israel could hit several targets, including the headquarters of the Popular Mobilization Forces, PMF, a governmental umbrella organization that oversees various paramilitaries, including those close to Iran. Last week, rumors were rife in political and media circles that Israel had drawn up a list of 35 targets in Iraq, including the locations and names of political leaders and the heads of armed factions. Yet paramilitary commanders and security officials insisted to me there is no indication that such a list exists. Its targets in Iraq are known and clear. It will attack the camps of some armed factions, as well as the camps and headquarters of the Popular Mobilization Forces, and may target some commanders of the armed factions, a senior PMF official told me. The only 2 figures who are actually targeted are Akram al-Kabi, the commander of Harakat Hezbollah al-Nujaba, and Abu Hussein al-Muhammadawi, the commander of Kataib Hezbollah, the official said. The official noted that the leaders of other Iranian-linked armed factions have traded their military roles for more political and economic ones, and no longer have any real influence on the armed resistance to Israel. The Israelis and Americans know this and are well aware of it, and have no interest in targeting them, he said. On Tuesday evening, immediately after the Iranian missile attack ended, the anti-Israel Iraqi paramilitaries that make up the Islamic Resistance issued a joint statement. They said they would not target U.S. interests and military bases in Iraq unless Washington helps Israel attack Iran, or if Iraq's airspace is used for Israeli bombing raids. Then all American bases and interests in Iraq and the Regio. All parties agreed to stop any military operations at this stage, but if Israel strikes any of them, everyone will respond at once, a Harakat Hezbollah al-Nujaba commander told me. American and Israeli interests in Iraq and the region will all be targeted. Precautionary measures. Sudani has put all Iraqi military forces on high alert since Tuesday evening. Most armed faction commanders have not appeared in public since then. Meanwhile, a meeting was convened by the Popular Mobilization Forces leadership on Monday to discuss the latest developments and ways to secure its offices and forces, commanders told me. According to one person present at the meeting, they all agreed to avoid engaging in the escalating regional conflict, including attacking U.S. forces in Iraq, which they had done repeatedly before the beginning of this war. They also decided to reduce the number of paramilitary troops at their headquarters and inform commanders to avoid being there, too. The PMF leadership agreed to send all commanders strict instructions that all the fighters registered with the organization should not be involved in the regional conflict in any way. If they decide to engage in the battle, they should not use their fighters registered on the Popular Mobilization's payroll or its vehicles or equipment, said the source at the meeting. One senior commander, who was also at the meeting, described the situation as very critical and said, "Any mistake, we will all pay the price for. We are targeted. Our troops' locations, headquarters and weapons warehouses are exposed and known, so there is no room for any uncounted action," he said. "It is easy. We are regular troops, so our choice is the government's choice. It is that simple." Listen to the full version on the official dinarreport.com website and become our supporter on Patreon. Source: Dinar Recaps.